"Can you stay until I stop shaking?" she asked a stranger, not knowing who stood before her. "Welcome, welcome, welcome to Soul Stories. We are so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive into this incredible, heart-wrenching, and ultimately beautiful journey, do us a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button right now if you haven't already, and tap that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one." The coffee shop sat on the corner of Maple Street and Fifth Avenue, a small establishment with a weathered brick facade and windows that fogged over on cold mornings. It had been there for 40 years, passed down through 3 generations of the Moretti family, and it had witnessed countless stories unfold within its walls: first dates and last goodbyes, business deals and broken hearts, quiet mornings of solitude and loud afternoons of celebration. But the story that began there on that particular Tuesday morning in February would be unlike any other. Daniel Mercer pushed open the heavy wooden door at exactly 9:47 a.m., as he had done every weekday morning for the past 3 years. The bell above the door chimed softly, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. The warmth of the shop embraced him immediately, a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside, and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled his lungs with each breath. He nodded to Maria behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes who had never once asked him why he always ordered the same thing and never drank it, why he always sat at the same table and stared at nothing, why he came every single day like a man fulfilling a sentence rather than seeking pleasure. "The usual, Mr. Mercer?" Maria asked, already reaching for a ceramic cup. "Please," Daniel replied, his voice carrying the practiced politeness of a man who had learned to go through the motions of human interaction without actually engaging in them. He made his way to the corner table. His table, though he had never claimed it officially. It was positioned near the window but angled away from the direct view of passers-by, offering a vantage point from which he could observe the world without being observed in return. The chair was worn in a way that suggested countless hours of occupation, and the small table bore the faint circular stains of coffee cups, long since cleared away. Daniel sat down heavily, the exhaustion in his bones having nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the weight of simply existing. He was 36 years old, though on some days he felt ancient, and on others he felt like a child lost in a world that had grown too large and too cruel. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to perfection by a designer whose name most people would recognize, though Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had cared about such things. His tie was slightly crooked, something that would have horrified him 3 years ago, when appearances had mattered, when he had believed that the external could somehow protect or enhance the internal. 3 years ago, everything had been different. 3 years ago, he had been a different person entirely. Maria appeared at his elbow with his espresso, setting it down on a small saucer with the practiced grace of decades of experience. Steam curled upward from the dark liquid, delicate wisps that rose and disappeared like memories too painful to hold. "Thank you," Daniel said automatically. Maria lingered for just a moment, and Daniel could feel her wanting to say something, to reach out, to connect, to offer some small comfort to the man who had become a fixture in her establishment. But she had learned, over these 3 years, that Daniel Mercer did not welcome such overtures, so she simply nodded and returned to her post behind the counter, leaving him alone with his untouched coffee and his suffocating thoughts. Daniel wrapped his fingers around the warm cup, but did not lift it to his lips. He stared at the dark surface of the espresso, watching the steam rise and dissipate, and allowed his mind to wander to the places it always wandered when he let down his guard. He thought about Sarah. He thought about her laugh, the way it had filled rooms and lifted spirits and made him believe that the world was fundamentally good. He thought about her hands, always in motion, always creating. She had been an artist, a painter of abstract landscapes that captured emotions rather than places, feelings rather than forms. He thought about the way she had looked at him on their wedding day, standing barefoot on a beach in California with flowers in her hair and tears of joy streaming down her face. "I'm going to love you forever," she had whispered as they exchanged vows, "even after forever ends." He thought about Ethan, his son, his beautiful, miraculous, impossible son, born on a rainy Thursday afternoon after 18 hours of labor, arriving into the world with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly, screaming his existence into being with a force that had made Daniel laugh and cry at the same time. He remembered holding Ethan for the first time, this tiny creature no bigger than a football, with fingers so small they wrapped around Daniel's thumb and refused to let go. He remembered thinking that he had never understood love until that moment, that everything he had felt before, even for Sarah, had been a shadow compared to this overwhelming, terrifying, all-consuming devotion. "I will protect you," he had promised his newborn son. "I will keep you safe. I will be there for you, always." He had broken that promise. He had broken all of his promises. Daniel blinked, pulling himself back from the edge of the abyss that always waited for him when he allowed his thoughts to roam freely. He looked around the coffee shop, grounding himself in the present moment. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of quiet conversations, the clink of ceramic against ceramic. That was when he saw her. She was small, so small that at first Daniel thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that perhaps exhaustion had finally caught up with him, and he was seeing things that weren't there. But no, she was real, a little girl standing in the middle of the coffee shop, looking around with the wide-eyed uncertainty of someone who had lost their way. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the soft morning light filtering through the fogged windows, and her cheeks carried a flush that might have been cold or might have been something else entirely. She wore a pink coat that had seen better days, the fabric worn at the elbows and the zipper held together with a safety pin where the pull had broken off. On her feet were small boots that had once been white but were now gray with age and wear. But it was her head that drew Daniel's attention and held it. She wore a knitted beanie, pink with delicate white flowers embroidered along the edge. It was pulled low over her forehead, covering her ears and most of her scalp, and beneath it, Daniel could see, there was nothing. No hair, not a single strand. His breath caught in his throat. He knew what that meant. He knew it intimately, horribly, personally. He had watched Sarah's beautiful auburn hair fall out in clumps during her chemotherapy treatments. He had held her as she cried over the bathroom sink, mourning the loss of something that seemed so superficial, and yet meant so much. He had shaved her head himself when the patches became too painful to look at, had kissed her bare scalp and told her she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. This little girl was sick, seriously sick. The kind of sick that steals hair and color and energy, and sometimes, far too often, steals everything else too. The little girl spotted Daniel watching her, and instead of looking away or seeking out an adult, she began walking toward him. Her steps were slow and slightly unsteady, as if each one required more effort than it should have. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed rabbit with matted fur and one ear that was coming loose at the seam. Daniel watched her approach, frozen in place, unable to move or speak or look away. She stopped beside his table and looked up at him with eyes that were far too large for her face, brown eyes, deep and earnest, carrying a wisdom that no 4-year-old should possess. They were eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, fought too hard for far too long. They were eyes that reminded him, with a pain so sharp it stole his breath, of Ethan. "Excuse me," the little girl said, her voice small and slightly hoarse. "Can you stay until I stop shaking? I'm really tired and Mommy said I should sit down if I feel wobbly." Daniel stared at her. For 3 years he had perfected the art of distance. He had built walls around his heart so high and so thick that nothing could penetrate them. Not the sympathy of colleagues who didn't know what to say, not the concern of friends who had eventually stopped trying, not the well-meaning interventions of family members who wanted him to move on and find happiness again, as if grief were a destination you could simply drive past rather than a country you were forced to inhabit. He had become an expert at deflection, at keeping people at arm's length, at answering questions with questions, and avoiding any conversation that threatened to venture below the surface. He had attended therapy sessions and sat in silence for 50 minutes at a time, refusing to give voice to the demons that haunted him because giving them voice would make them real, would acknowledge their power over him. He had convinced himself that he was fine, that he was coping, that the numbness that had settled over him like a heavy blanket was actually a form of healing rather than a symptom of something far more dangerous. But this child, this fragile little person with her worn rabbit and her missing hair and her trembling hands, had walked right up to his carefully constructed defenses and asked a simple question, and the walls, those walls he had spent 3 years building, began to crack. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't trust his voice. Instead, he nodded slowly, deliberately, and reached across to pull out the chair beside him. The little girl's face transformed. A smile spread across her features, tired around the edges but genuine in a way that Daniel hadn't seen in a very long time. It was the smile of a child who still believed in the goodness of strangers, who hadn't yet learned that the world could be cruel, who maintained her innocence despite everything she had clearly been through. She climbed into the chair with effort, her small body working hard to accomplish what should have been a simple task. Daniel had to resist the urge to help her, sensing somehow that she needed to do this herself, that independence was something she was fighting to maintain. Once settled, she placed her stuffed rabbit on the table and patted its head with a gentle, practiced motion. "This is Buttons," she announced, looking up at Daniel with those impossibly large brown eyes. "She's been with me since I was a baby. She's tired too. We're both really tired today. But Buttons says that's okay because being tired means we're fighting hard, and fighting hard means we're going to win." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the ice that had encased his heart for 3 long years. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure, trying not to let this child see how profoundly her simple presence was affecting him. "Buttons sounds very wise," he managed to say, his voice rougher than he intended. The little girl nodded solemnly. "She is. She's been to the hospital with me 147 times. She's an expert now." 147 times. Daniel's mind reeled at the number. This child, this tiny person who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, had been to the hospital 147 times. The weight of that number pressed down on him, a physical sensation that made it hard to breathe. "That's a lot of visits," he said carefully. The doctors and nurses know Buttons by name now. Dr. Patterson says she's his favorite patient because she never cries during blood draws." The little girl giggled, a sound so unexpected and so pure that Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "I cry sometimes, but that's okay. Mommy says crying just means my feelings are too big to stay inside, and it's better to let them out than keep them locked up." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. The little girl seemed to sense that something was wrong. She tilted her head to one side and studied his face with an intensity that was disconcerting coming from someone so young. "You look sad," she observed. "Are you sad?" Daniel hesitated. When was the last time someone had asked him that so directly? When was the last time he had allowed himself to answer honestly? "Yes," he admitted. "I am a little sad." "That's okay," the girl said, reaching out to pat his hand with her small fingers. "I get sad sometimes too. But Mommy says sadness is just love with nowhere to go, and eventually it finds a new place to live and it doesn't hurt as much anymore." Daniel stared at her, struck by the profound simplicity of her words. Sadness is just love with nowhere to go. He had never thought of it that way before. He had always viewed his grief as a punishment, as a weight he was condemned to carry for the rest of his life. But this child, this wise and weary 4-year-old, had just reframed everything. "I'm Lily, by the way," the girl continued, apparently satisfied that she had addressed his sadness sufficiently for the moment. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he replied. "My name is Daniel." "That's a nice name. Like Daniel in the lion's den. Do you know that story? It's in the Bible. My grandma used to read it to me before she went to heaven. Daniel was very brave, and the lions couldn't hurt him because God was protecting him." "I know the story," Daniel said softly. "Maybe that's why you look so brave," Lily said thoughtfully. "You have the same name as the brave man, so you must be brave too." Before Daniel could respond, and he honestly had no idea what he would have said, a frantic voice cut through the quiet of the coffee shop. "Lily!" A young woman rushed toward them from the direction of the counter, her face a mask of panic and embarrassment and fear. She was in her late 20s, with tired eyes that carried dark circles beneath them, and hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail that was coming loose on one side. Her coat was thin for February, the kind of coat you wore when it was the only coat you owned, and her jeans were faded at the knees in a way that suggested wear rather than fashion. She was beautiful, Daniel realized with a distant sort of surprise. Not in the polished, curated way of the women he encountered at business functions and charity galas, but in a real and immediate way, the beauty of someone who worked hard and loved deeply and refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. "Oh my God!" the woman gasped, reaching their table. "I'm so sorry. I was just ordering our drinks and I turned around for 1 second and she was gone. I didn't mean for her to bother you. I'm so sorry." Daniel raised his hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "It's all right," he said. "She's no bother. She was just introducing me to Buttons." The woman, Lily's mother obviously, hesitated. Her eyes darted between her daughter, now contentedly seated and humming softly to her stuffed rabbit, and the stranger in the expensive suit who had apparently welcomed her. Daniel could see the calculations running through her mind, the assessments and judgments and fears that any mother would feel in this situation. A strange man, an expensive suit, her vulnerable child. None of the equations added up to anything comfortable. But then Lily looked up at her mother with that radiant, innocent smile. "Mommy, this is Daniel. Like Daniel in the lion's den. He was sad, so I sat with him to help him feel better. Buttons says that's what friends do." Something in the woman's expression shifted. The panic receded, replaced by something softer, a recognition, perhaps, that this moment was not what she had feared. "I'm Rachel," she said, her voice cautious but polite. Rachel Torres. Thank you for being kind to her. She was kind to me, Daniel replied honestly. I'm Daniel. Daniel Mercer. If the name meant anything to her, and it should have, given that Mercer Technologies was one of the largest tech companies on the East Coast and his face had been on the covers of numerous magazines. She didn't show it. She simply nodded and reached for Lily's hand. Come on, sweetheart. We should let the nice man finish his coffee in peace. But Mommy, he's sad, Lily protested. We can't leave him when he's sad. That's not nice. Rachel's face flushed with embarrassment. Lily, it's not polite to. She's not wrong, Daniel heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could analyze them, before his carefully maintained defenses could intervene. I was sad. I've been sad for a long time, but talking to your daughter, it helped. Please, won't you both sit down? Let me buy you whatever you were ordering. Rachel hesitated, clearly torn. Daniel could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped under invisible weights. He recognized that exhaustion. Not the physical kind that sleep could cure, but the bone-deep weariness that came from fighting battles that never seemed to end. Please, Daniel said again. Softer this time. I could use the company. Truly. A long moment passed. Then Rachel nodded slowly and sank into the chair across from him. Just for a few minutes, she said. Lily needs to rest anyway. Lily beamed triumphantly and resumed her quiet conversation with Buttons. And Daniel Mercer, CEO of a billion-dollar company, a man who had convinced himself he was beyond human connection, felt something stir in the frozen wasteland of his heart. It was faint, barely perceptible, like the first green shoot pushing through snow-covered ground at the end of a long winter. It felt like hope. The next hour passed in a way that time rarely passed for Daniel anymore. Quickly, pleasantly, without the dragging weight of seconds that usually characterized his days. Maria brought over Rachel's order, a chai tea latte and a small hot chocolate for Lily, and Daniel insisted on paying despite Rachel's protests. They talked about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. Lily dominated much of the conversation, sharing elaborate stories about Button's adventures and asking Daniel questions with the unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. Do you have kids? Lily asked at one point, dipping a small cookie into her hot chocolate. Daniel felt the question like a blade between his ribs. I did, he said carefully. A little boy. His name was Ethan. Lily's eyes widened. Where is he now? Lily, Rachel interjected quickly. Sometimes it's not polite to... It's okay, Daniel said, surprised to find that it actually was. He's in heaven now, with his mommy. They're together. Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. Like my grandma. She's in heaven too. Mommy says heaven is really nice and everyone who goes there gets to be happy all the time and never feel sick or tired or scared. I hope so, Daniel said quietly. I really hope so. I think they're friends, Lily continued thoughtfully. You're Ethan and my grandma. I bet they play together and eat ice cream for breakfast and stay up as late as they want. Daniel couldn't speak. The image she had painted, his son, happy and healthy and playing with this child's grandmother in some perfect otherworldly realm, was almost too much to bear, but not in the devastating way he had grown accustomed to. It was overwhelming in a different way, a gentler way. Rachel reached across and touched his hand briefly. I'm sorry, she murmured. She doesn't always understand boundaries. No, Daniel said, finding his voice. She understands more than most adults I know. They talked more after that. Daniel learned that Rachel worked 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner during the day and cleaning apartments in the evenings to cover the medical bills that insurance didn't fully address. He learned that she had been studying early childhood education at the local community college when she got pregnant, and that she had never finished her degree because life had intervened in ways she hadn't anticipated. He learned that Lily had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 18 months ago, and that she had been fighting ever since. Good days and bad days, hospital stays and home recoveries, treatments that made her sick, and treatments that gave them hope. She's a fighter, Rachel said, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and fear that Daniel recognized intimately. She's the strongest person I know. She seems remarkable, Daniel agreed. She is. She's everything. The rawness in Rachel's voice struck Daniel deeply. He knew that kind of love, the kind that consumed you, that defined you, that made you willing to tear down mountains and drain oceans if it would help your child. He had loved Ethan like that. He still did. Eventually, Rachel glanced at her phone and her eyes widened with alarm. Oh no, we're going to be late. Lily has a doctor's appointment in 40 minutes. She stood quickly, gathering her things with the practiced efficiency of someone who is always rushing from one obligation to the next. Lily slid out of her chair more slowly, the energy she had displayed earlier clearly depleted. Come on, sweetheart, Rachel said gently. Let's get your coat on." Daniel stood as well, unsure of what to say or do. He didn't want them to leave. The realization surprised him. For 3 years, he had wanted nothing more than to be left alone, and now, suddenly, the prospect of solitude filled him with something close to dread. "Thank you," Rachel said, meeting his eyes, "for being so kind, for letting her sit with you, for everything." "Thank you," Daniel replied, "for letting me talk to her, for sitting with me. It was the best morning I've had in a very long time." Rachel smiled, a genuine smile that softened her tired features and made her look younger, lighter. Lily, now bundled in her coat and clutching buttons tightly, looked up at Daniel with those big brown eyes. "Bye-bye, Daniel," she said. "I hope you feel less sad tomorrow." Then, before Daniel could respond, she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his leg in a hug. She held on for just a moment, long enough for Daniel to feel the warmth of her, the realness of her, the life still burning bright inside her fragile body. "Thank you for letting me stay until I stopped shaking," she whispered. Then she let go, took her mother's hand, and walked toward the door. Daniel stood motionless, watching them leave. Rachel pushed open the heavy wooden door, the bell chiming softly overhead, and cold air rushed in from outside. She glanced back once, offering a small wave, and then they were gone, swallowed by the gray February morning, disappearing into a world that suddenly seemed much larger and much lonelier than it had before. Daniel sank back into his chair. His espresso sat cold and untouched on the table before him. His scarf lay draped over the back of the chair where Lily had been sitting, left behind in the rush of their departure. He reached out and touched the soft fabric, still carrying a faint trace of warmth from the small body it had been wrapped around. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Mercer allowed himself to feel. The tears came without warning, sliding down his cheeks in silent streams. He didn't try to stop them. He sat in the corner of the coffee shop, surrounded by the quiet murmur of strangers living their ordinary lives, and he cried for everything he had lost and everything he had just begun to find. Maria appeared at his elbow with a fresh cup of coffee and a small plate of biscotti. She set them down without comment, but her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of human kindness that he would have rejected a day ago, but now received gratefully. "She was a sweet little thing," Maria said softly. "She seemed to like you." "Yes," Daniel whispered. "She did." Maria nodded and walked away, leaving him to his grief and his hope and the strange alchemy of emotions that swirled in his chest like a storm breaking. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and white and silent, and somewhere in the frozen wasteland of Daniel Mercer's heart, spring had begun. The days that followed were strange and restless. Daniel returned to his penthouse apartment each evening, 37 floors above the city, all glass and chrome and empty spaces, and found himself unable to settle. He wandered from room to room, seeing his home through new eyes, noticing for the first time how sterile it had become. There were no photographs on the walls. He had taken them all down after Ethan's funeral, unable to bear the sight of smiling faces that would never smile again. There were no personal touches, no evidence of the life he had lived before tragedy struck. The apartment looked like a model unit, designed to be impressive but never actually inhabited. He thought about the coffee shop. He thought about the way sunlight had filtered through the foggy windows. He thought about the warmth of human conversation, the sound of a child's laughter, the simple comfort of being seen. He thought about Lily. He thought about Rachel. He found himself reaching for his phone, wanting to call someone, anyone, but he couldn't remember the last time he had made a personal call. His contacts were full of business associates and board members and lawyers. There were no friends left, not because they had abandoned him, but because he had pushed them all away, one by one, until the silence around him was complete. On Thursday, he returned to the coffee shop. He told himself it was because the espresso was good. He told himself it was because the atmosphere was conducive to work. He told himself a dozen different lies, each one more transparent than the last. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He was hoping to see them again. He sat at his usual table, ordered his usual drink, and waited. The morning rush came and went. Business people in suits, students with laptops, elderly couples sharing pastries and decades of companionship. Daniel watched them all, feeling like a ghost observing the living. At 10:15, the door opened, and his heart leaped. But it wasn't them. It was a young man with headphones and a messenger bag, already on his phone before the door had even closed behind him. Daniel's disappointment was sharper than he had expected. He stayed until noon, nursing 3 espressos and pretending to read the newspaper on his phone. They didn't come. He returned on Friday. Same table, same routine, same hope. They didn't come. He returned on Saturday, even though the coffee shop was more crowded on weekends and he usually avoided crowds. He sat at a different table when his usual one was occupied, feeling irrationally displaced. They didn't come. By Sunday, Daniel was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. He had become obsessed with two strangers he had met for exactly 1 hour of his life. A sick child and her exhausted mother had somehow slipped past his defenses and taken up residence in his thoughts, and he had no idea what to do about it. He went to the cemetery instead. It was a private memorial garden on the outskirts of the city, exclusive and peaceful, with rolling green lawns and ancient oak trees and headstones that cost more than some people's houses. Daniel had purchased 2 plots side by side, one for Sarah and one for Ethan, with room for himself next to them when his time came. He walked the familiar path, his feet knowing the way, even when his eyes blurred with unshed tears. The February air was cold and sharp, biting at his exposed skin, but he welcomed the discomfort. It reminded him that he was still alive, still capable of feeling something. Sarah's headstone was elegant and simple, white marble with her name and dates and a single line beneath. She painted the world more beautiful. Ethan's was smaller, heartbreakingly smaller, with his name and his 3 short years of life and another line, forever. Our little explorer. Daniel knelt between them, the cold ground soaking through his expensive trousers, and spoke aloud for the first time in weeks. I met someone, he said, his voice rough from disuse. 2 someones, actually. A little girl named Lily and her mother Rachel. Lily is sick. Cancer, like you, Sarah. She's fighting so hard. She reminded me of everything. Of Ethan. Of what it felt like to love someone with everything you have. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if there's anything after this. Any place where you and Ethan exist together, happy and whole, but I hope there is. I hope Lily was right. I hope you're eating ice cream for breakfast and staying up late and never feeling tired or scared or sick. A tear slid down his cheek and dropped onto the frozen ground. I miss you, both of you. Every single day I miss you so much it feels like drowning. But lately there's something else. Something new. And I don't know what to do with it. He stayed there for a long time, kneeling between the 2 graves, letting the cold seep into his bones until he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. Then he stood, brushed the dirt and frost from his knees, and made a decision. He was going to find them. Finding Rachel Torres proved easier than Daniel had expected. He had resources at his disposal. Entire teams of people whose job it was to locate information and solve problems. But something about using those resources for this purpose felt wrong, like cheating at a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. Instead, he returned to the coffee shop the next morning and asked Maria, the woman with the little girl, he said, trying to sound casual and probably failing miserably, the one who was here last Tuesday. Do you know her? Maria's eyes crinkled with knowing amusement. Rachel? Sure, she comes in once or twice a week. Usually on Tuesdays and Fridays when her schedule allows. Tuesday, Daniel repeated. So she might be here tomorrow? She might. If Lily's feeling up to it. Maria paused, studying his face. She's a good woman, that Rachel. Works herself to the bone for that little girl. Never complains, never asks for help. Just keeps going. Daniel nodded slowly. Do you know anything about Lily's condition? How she's doing? The little one? Maria's expression softened. She has her good days and bad days. The treatments are hard on her, but she never loses her smile. Bravest kid I've ever seen. She paused again. Why do you ask, Mr. Mercer? If you don't mind my being direct. Daniel considered the question. Why did he ask? Why did he care? Why had this chance encounter with 2 strangers shattered 3 years of carefully cultivated numbness? I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Maria smiled, a warm and genuine expression that reminded Daniel of his grandmother. Tuesday, she said. Come back Tuesday. Tuesday arrived with agonizing slowness. Daniel barely slept Monday night, his mind racing with anticipation and anxiety. What would he say? What if they didn't come? What if they came and Rachel was uncomfortable with his presence? What if Lily was too sick to remember him? He arrived at the coffee shop at 9:30, half an hour earlier than usual, and took his regular table. Maria brought him his espresso without being asked and gave him an encouraging nod. The minutes crawled by. At 10:07 the door opened, and there she was. Lily entered first, bundled in her pink coat and flowered beanie, her stuffed rabbit buttons clutched under one arm. She looked tired, more tired than she had the week before, but her eyes were bright and alert, scanning the coffee shop with obvious purpose. When she spotted Daniel, her face lit up like sunrise. "Daniel!" she cried, breaking away from her mother and rushing toward him with as much speed as her small body could muster. "You're here! I told Mommy you would be here! I told her we should come back because Daniel would be waiting!" She threw her arms around his legs, just as she had done before, and Daniel felt that same rush of warmth and connection and terrifying vulnerability. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice catching. "I'm so glad you came back." Rachel approached more slowly, her expression a mixture of surprise and cautious pleasure. "She's been talking about you all week," she said. "The nice man at the coffee shop who let her sit with him. I wasn't sure if I was hoping you'd come back," Daniel admitted. "I've been here every day since last Tuesday, hoping to see you both." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "Every day?" "Every day." A moment of silence passed between them, weighted with unspoken things. Then Lily tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Did you bring Buttons' friend? The one you promised?" Daniel blinked. I didn't promise." "Lily," Rachel said gently, "you can't just expect—" "Actually," Daniel said, remembering the small package in his coat pocket, "I did bring something. I wasn't sure you'd be here, but I brought it just in case." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gift bag, which he handed to Lily. Her eyes went wide as she peered inside. "It's a doctor bunny," she gasped, pulling out a plush rabbit wearing a tiny white coat and carrying a miniature stethoscope. "Buttons, look, you have a doctor friend now, for the days when you have to go to the hospital," Daniel explained, crouching down to her level. "Dr. Whiskers is very good at making scary things less scary, and he insists on proper nutrition and lots of rest." Lily giggled and hugged the toy tightly, then threw her arms around Daniel's neck. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the best present ever." Daniel hugged her back carefully, mindful of her fragile body, feeling tears threaten at the corners of his eyes. When he looked up, Rachel was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That was incredibly thoughtful," she said softly. "She deserved a teammate," Daniel replied. Quick reminder, friends, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Soul-Stirring Stories. The best is yet to come, and you don't want to miss a single moment. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Daniel rearranged his entire schedule to be at the coffee shop on Tuesdays and Fridays, the days when Rachel and Lily typically came. He delegated meetings, rescheduled calls, and generally made himself available in ways that would have been unthinkable a month ago. His employees noticed the change. His board of directors noticed the change. His assistant, a highly efficient woman named Miranda, who had worked for him for 5 years, openly asked if he was feeling all right. "I'm feeling better than I have in years," Daniel told her, and was surprised to realize it was true. The conversations at the coffee shop grew longer and deeper. Daniel learned everything about Rachel's life, her childhood in a small town in Pennsylvania, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her relationship with Lily's father, a brief one, ending before Lily was born, and leaving behind nothing but heartbreak and a blessing she wouldn't trade for anything. He learned about the diagnosis, the day the doctor had used words like cancer and treatment and prognosis in reference to her 2-year-old daughter. He learned about the hospital stays, the chemotherapy sessions, the blood draws and bone marrow biopsies, and all the other indignities that came with fighting for your child's life. He learned about the bills, mountains of medical debt that insurance covered partially but never completely, forcing Rachel to work multiple jobs while also caring for a chronically ill child. He learned about the late nights and early mornings, the constant exhaustion, the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. And Rachel learned about him. He told her about Sarah, their meeting, their marriage, their brief and beautiful life together. He told her about Ethan, the pregnancy, the birth, the overwhelming love that had consumed him from the first moment he held his son. He told her about the cancer, Sarah's cancer, the diagnosis that had come out of nowhere when Ethan was just 2 years old, shattering their perfect world into a million pieces. He told her about the treatments and the hope and the setbacks and more hope and finally, inevitably, the end. "She made me promise," Daniel said one morning, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right before she died, she made me promise that I would keep living, not just existing, really living. She knew me too well. She knew I would try to disappear into grief." "Did you?" Rachel asked gently. "Disappear? For 3 years," Daniel admitted, "until Lily walked up to my table and asked me to stay until she stopped shaking." Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, innocent and comforting, but Daniel felt it like a lightning bolt. "She has that effect on people," Rachel said softly. "She has her mother's gift," Daniel replied. They looked at each other across the small table, the coffee shop buzzing with life around them, and something shifted between them, something important, something that couldn't be named yet but was there nonetheless, growing in the space between their joined hands. A month into their new routine, Daniel made his first offer of help. It happened on a Friday when Rachel arrived alone, her eyes red and swollen, her hands shaking as she clutched her cup of chai tea. "Lily's in the hospital," she said before Daniel could even ask. "She had a fever last night that wouldn't break. They admitted her this morning. They're running tests." Daniel was on his feet immediately. "Which hospital?" I'll drive you. No, I can't. I just came to clear my head for a few minutes. My neighbor is with her. I can't. I shouldn't. Rachel. Daniel's voice was firm but gentle. Let me help. Please. She looked at him, and he saw all the fear and exhaustion and desperation she had been carrying alone for 18 months. He saw the walls she had built to survive, the same kind of walls he had built, crumbling under the weight of what she was facing. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? You barely know us. Daniel considered the question carefully. Because your daughter reminded me what it feels like to be alive, he said. Because you've been carrying this alone for too long. Because I spent 3 years hiding from the world, and I don't want to hide anymore. He paused. Because I care about you, both of you, more than I've cared about anything in a very long time. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Then the tears came, spilling down her cheeks in silent streams. Daniel pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. The hospital was a towering glass and steel structure on the Upper East Side, one of the best pediatric facilities in the country. Daniel had donated millions to it over the years, though he had never stepped foot inside since Ethan's death. Walking through those sliding doors with Rachel at his side, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the sound of soft-soled shoes on linoleum floors, was one of the hardest things he had ever done. But he did it. He did it because Rachel needed him. He did it because Lily needed him. He did it because he had promised Sarah he would keep living. And this was what living looked like. Showing up for the people you loved, even when it was terrifying. Lily was in a private room on the pediatric oncology floor. She was hooked up to IV lines and monitors, looking small and pale and impossibly fragile in the large hospital bed. But when she saw Daniel walk through the door, her face lit up with that familiar, radiant smile. Daniel, you came to visit. Of course I did, Daniel said, approaching her bed carefully. Dr. Whiskers was very worried. He insisted on a consultation. Lily giggled weakly. Dr. Whiskers is with Buttons in my bag. They're having a meeting about my treatment. Excellent. The best doctors always consult with each other. Rachel stood by the window, watching them interact. There were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. A real smile, the first one Daniel had seen from her all day. Daniel stayed at the hospital until midnight. He went downstairs and brought back food when Rachel forgot to eat. He talked to the doctors and used his connections to ensure Lily had access to the best specialists in the field. He sat beside her bed and read stories until she fell asleep, his voice growing hoarse but never stopping. And when Rachel finally collapsed in exhaustion in the chair beside her daughter's bed, Daniel covered her with his coat and kept watch over both of them through the long night. Lily was discharged 3 days later, the fever traced to a complication from her latest treatment. Manageable, the doctor said, but they would need to adjust her protocol going forward. Daniel drove them home. Home was a small apartment in a building that had seen better decades, with a broken buzzer and a stairwell that smelled like old carpet and too many years of too many lives. Daniel helped Rachel carry the bags while Lily walked slowly between them, still weak but determined to make it on her own 2 feet. The apartment itself was tiny but clean, every inch of space carefully utilized. Lily's corner of the small bedroom was decorated with drawings and photos and strings of fairy lights that cast a warm glow over everything. It's not much, Rachel said, a note of embarrassment in her voice. But it's ours. It's perfect, Daniel said honestly. It feels like a home. Rachel looked at him with surprise and something else. Gratitude maybe, or the beginnings of something deeper. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. The hospital, the doctors, staying with us all night. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't owe me anything, Daniel said, seeing Lily smile as payment enough. But that night, after he had said goodbye and driven back to his empty penthouse, Daniel made a decision. He was done standing on the sidelines of their lives. He was done offering help and stepping back. He wanted more. He wanted to be there, truly there, for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of growing closer while respecting boundaries. Daniel began helping in small, subtle ways. He arranged for a cleaning service to come to Rachel's apartment once a week, presenting it as a promotional offer she had somehow won. He accidentally left gift cards to grocery stores in Lily's coat pockets. He happened to be in the area, with hot meals on evenings when he knew Rachel had worked double shifts. Rachel wasn't fooled for a moment, but she stopped protesting after a while. The help was too needed, the kindness too genuine, and somewhere along the way, the help transformed into something else. Daniel started picking Lily up from her treatments when Rachel couldn't get off work. He sat with her in the waiting rooms, read her stories, distracted her with games and jokes, and the steady presence of someone who wasn't going anywhere. He started coming over for dinner, simple meals that he helped Rachel cook in her tiny kitchen. The 3 of them crowded around a small table that barely fit in the eating area. He started being part of their lives in a way that felt natural and inevitable, as if he had always been there, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. "Mommy," Lily said one evening while they were watching a movie on Rachel's worn couch, Lily tucked between them with buttons and Dr. Whiskers, "Is Daniel going to be here tomorrow too?" Rachel glanced at Daniel over her daughter's head. "I don't know, sweetie. Daniel has a lot of important work to do, but he likes being here," Lily said confidently. "I can tell. He smiles more when he's with us." Daniel felt his heart constrict. "She's right," he admitted. "I do smile more when I'm with you both." Lily nodded, satisfied. "So you should move in," she said, as if this were the most logical conclusion in the world. "Then you can smile all the time." Rachel laughed nervously. "Lily, that's not really how—" "We'll see," Daniel said, meeting Rachel's eyes. "We'll see." The crisis came 3 months later. It started like any other Wednesday. Daniel at the coffee shop, Rachel running late because of a complication with her morning shift, Lily at preschool for the half-day program she attended when she was feeling well enough. Then Daniel's phone rang. "Daniel." Rachel's voice was barely recognizable, tight and high with terror. "Lily collapsed at school. They're taking her to the hospital. I can't. My car won't start. I can't. I'm on my way," Daniel said, already moving. "Stay where you are. I'll pick you up in 5 minutes." He made it in 4. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic and red lights and Rachel's whispered prayers in the passenger seat. Daniel drove faster than he had ever driven in his life, weaving through traffic with a desperation that bordered on reckless. They arrived at the emergency room to find chaos. Doctors and nurses surrounded Lily's small body as machines beeped and alarms sounded, and Rachel's face went white with terror. "What happened?" she demanded. "What's wrong with my daughter?" The doctor's explanation came in fragments that Daniel struggled to piece together. Infection, compromised immune system, sepsis. The words landed like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. "We're doing everything we can," the doctor said, but Daniel heard what he wasn't saying. The prognosis wasn't good. Lily was fighting for her life. Rachel collapsed. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently into a chair, holding her as she sobbed and screamed and cursed at a universe that could be so cruel to someone so small and innocent. "I can't lose her," Rachel gasped between sobs. "I can't. She's all I have. She's everything." "You won't," Daniel said, though he had no right to make such a promise. "You won't lose her. I won't let that happen." He made calls. He called every specialist he knew, every contact he had built over years of philanthropy and business dealings. Within hours, the best doctors in the country were consulting on Lily's case, brought in by helicopter and video conference and whatever means necessary. Money was no object. Nothing was an object. Daniel would have bankrupted himself 10 times over to save that little girl. The night stretched on. Hour after agonizing hour, Daniel never left Rachel's side. He held her hand when she needed comfort, gave her space when she needed to pace and pray and bargain with God. He fetched coffee and blankets and sat with her in the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting room, watching the clock tick toward an uncertain future. At 3:47 a.m. the doctor emerged with news. Daniel felt Rachel's hand tighten on his so hard her nails drew blood. "She's stable," the doctor said, and the words hung in the air like a benediction. "She's not out of the woods yet, but she's fighting. Her vitals are improving." Rachel let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She turned to Daniel and threw her arms around him, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid with fear and relief. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Daniel held her and let his own tears fall, unashamed and unburdened. The recovery was slow. Lily spent 2 weeks in the hospital, fighting the infection that had nearly claimed her life. There were setbacks and scares, moments when the monitors beeped alarms and the doctors rushed in, and Rachel's face went pale with terror all over again. But gradually, incrementally, Lily improved. Daniel was there through all of it. He took a leave of absence from work, delegating everything to his capable leadership team, and essentially moved into the hospital. He slept on chairs and couches, ate vending machine food, and never complained about any of it. He was there when Lily woke up confused and scared. He was there when she asked for buttons and Dr. Whiskers. He was there when she smiled for the first time in days and whispered, "Daniel, you didn't leave." "Never," he said, brushing hair from her forehead with a gentle hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Rachel watched these interactions with a mixture of wonder and something deeper. Something that looked a lot like love. One night, while Lily slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Rachel and Daniel sat together in the dim hospital room, their chairs pulled close, their voices hushed. "You've been incredible," Rachel said. "Through all of this, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Daniel replied. I'm exactly where I want to be. Why? Rachel asked. The same question she had asked before, but with new weight now. Why us? You could be anywhere, doing anything, and instead you're sleeping on hospital chairs and eating terrible food and wearing the same clothes for days. Why? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. 3 years ago, he said finally, I lost everything. My wife, my son, my reason for living. I went through the motions of life, but I wasn't really here. I was a ghost, haunting my own existence. He turned to look at her, his eyes bright in the dim room. Then your daughter walked up to my table and asked me to stay until she stopped shaking, and something inside me woke up, something that had been sleeping for 3 years. He reached out and took her hand. I love her, he said simply. I love Lily like she was my own, and I love you, Rachel. I love your strength and your kindness, and your refusal to give up no matter what. I love the life we've built together, the three of us, and I don't want to go back to living without you. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. I know this is complicated. I know we haven't known each other that long. I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to understand why I'm here. Rachel didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. But Daniel answered it without hesitation, pulling her close, pouring 3 years of loneliness and hope into that single, perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, Rachel was smiling through her tears. I love you too, she whispered. I've been falling in love with you for months, and I was too scared to admit it. Then let's stop being scared, Daniel said. Together. 1 year later, the world looked different. Lily's hair had grown back. Soft golden curls that framed her round face and made her look, Rachel often said, like a little angel. She no longer needed her woolen beanie, though she still wore it sometimes out of habit or nostalgia. The treatments had worked. The cancer was in remission, and though there would be checkups and monitoring for years to come, the immediate threat had passed. Lily was healthy and happy and full of the boundless energy that belonged to all 5-year-olds. Daniel and Rachel had been officially together for 8 months, living in a house that Daniel had purchased, not the penthouse which he had sold, but a real house with a yard and a swing set and neighbors who waved hello over the fence. Rachel had gone back to school, completing her degree in early childhood education with Daniel's support and encouragement. She had accepted a job at a local preschool, finally living the dream she had put on hold so many years ago. And Daniel had changed, too. He still ran Mercer Technologies, but he had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, trusting his team to handle things while he focused on what really mattered. He had started a foundation in Sarah and Ethan's memory, dedicated to helping families afford the medical treatments their children needed. He had kept his promise finally. He was living, not just existing. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, Daniel suggested a family outing. There's somewhere I want to take you both, he said, keeping his destination mysterious despite Lily's enthusiastic interrogations. They drove through the city, past familiar streets and into the heart of downtown. And then, just as Rachel was about to demand answers, Daniel pulled up in front of a small building with a weathered brick facade and windows that fogged over in the cool autumn air. The coffee shop. Rachel turned to him with wide eyes. Daniel, this is where it started, he said simply. This is where Lily walked up to my table and changed my life forever. I wanted to come back here with both of you. They went inside. Maria, still behind the counter after all these years, looked up and beamed with recognition. Mr. Mercer, and Rachel and little Lily. Oh my goodness, look how big you've gotten. Lily ran to give Maria a hug, chattering about her hair and her new school and her pet goldfish named Bubbles. Daniel led Rachel to the same table in the corner, pulling out chairs for both of them. Wait, Lily said, stopping short. This is the table. This is where I asked if I could sit with you. That's right, Daniel said, smiling. Do you remember what you said? Lily scrunched up her face and thought. I asked if you could stay until I stopped shaking, because I was really tired. And you changed everything, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. They sat down, Daniel on one side, Lily and Rachel on the other, just as they had that first day, more than a year ago now. Maria brought them their drinks, espresso for Daniel, chai tea for Rachel, hot chocolate for Lily. Some things never change, Rachel observed, smiling. And some things change completely, Daniel replied, reaching into his pocket. He stood up from the table and walked around to Rachel's side. Then, as Lily gasped and Maria clutched her heart behind the counter, he knelt down on one knee. Daniel, Rachel breathed. He opened a small velvet box to reveal a ring, simple and elegant, a single diamond set in a band of white gold. Rachel Torres, he said, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. 1 year ago, your daughter walked into this coffee shop and asked me a question that saved my life. She asked me to stay, and I've been staying ever since." He looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. "I spent 3 years hiding from life, convinced that I didn't deserve happiness after everything I'd lost. But you showed me that love doesn't end when you lose someone. It just finds a new place to go." He reached for her hand with his free one. "I love you. I love Lily. I love the life we've built together, and I want to spend the rest of my days building more of it. Will you marry me?" Rachel's tears were flowing freely now, streaming down her cheeks in rivers of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." Daniel slid the ring onto her finger, and Lily threw herself into the middle of their embrace, squeezing them both with all the strength her small arms possessed. "Does this mean Daniel is going to be my daddy now?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Daniel pulled back and looked at her, this little girl who had changed everything. "If that's okay with you," he said softly. Lily beamed, that same radiant, innocent smile that had cracked through his walls more than a year ago. "It's more than okay," she said. "It's perfect." The coffee shop erupted in applause. Maria weeping openly, the other customers cheering, strangers celebrating the love story that had begun right there, in this very spot. Outside, the October sun cast golden light through the window, illuminating the small family huddled together at their corner table. And Daniel Mercer, who had once believed his capacity for joy had been buried with his first family, discovered that the heart has infinite room for love, that losing some doesn't mean you can't find more, that endings can become beginnings, that a simple question from a small, sick, impossibly brave little girl could change absolutely everything. "Can you stay until I stop shaking?" He had stayed, and he would keep staying for the rest of his life. 6 months later, on a warm spring day, Daniel and Rachel exchanged vows in a small ceremony in the backyard of their house. Lily served as flower girl, scattering rose petals with gleeful abandon, buttons and Dr. Whiskers tucked under one arm. The guest list was small: close friends, family members who had stood by them through everything, Maria from the coffee shop who had witnessed the beginning of their story. Daniel's vows were simple but profound. "I spent years believing I would never feel happiness again," he said, holding Rachel's hands in his. "I was wrong. You and Lily showed me that love doesn't die. It just transforms. It finds new vessels, new expressions, new people to hold it." He paused, blinking back tears. "You are my second chance, my unexpected blessing, my proof that life can surprise you with joy even after it has devastated you with loss. I promise to love you for all my days, to be the partner you deserve, to be the father Lily needs. I promise to stay, always, no matter what, until we all stop shaking." Rachel laughed through her tears at the reference. Her vows were equally moving. "Daniel, when Lily walked up to your table that day, I was terrified. I was exhausted and scared and barely holding on, and the last thing I needed was a complication." She squeezed his hands. "But you weren't a complication. You were an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was praying. You showed up when we needed you most and never left. You gave us stability, support, love, everything we had been missing, everything I thought we might never find." She smiled, radiant in her simple white dress. "I promise to love you with everything I have, to be your partner in all things, to build a life with you that honors the people we've lost and celebrates the people we've found. I promise to let you stay, forever, because there's nowhere else I'd rather have you." They exchanged rings. They kissed. Lily cheered louder than anyone, and as the small crowd applauded and the spring sunlight bathed them all in gold, Daniel looked at his new wife and his daughter now, officially and forever, and felt a peace he had thought lost to him forever. Sarah would have approved. He knew that with absolute certainty. She would have loved Rachel's strength and Lily's spirit. She would have been glad that Daniel had found his way back to the living. And Ethan, somewhere, somehow, Daniel believed his son was smiling too. The reception was joyful and simple, full of laughter and dancing and cake that Lily helped cut with great ceremony. As the afternoon faded into evening and the guests began to depart, Daniel found a moment alone with his new daughter. "Hey," he said, crouching down to her level. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" Lily asked, her face still smeared with frosting. "Do you remember that first day at the coffee shop? When you asked if you could sit with me?" Lily nodded. "What made you come up to me? You didn't know who I was. I was just a stranger." Lily considered the question with the seriousness of a 5-year-old philosopher. "You looked sad," she said finally, "and lonely. And I know what that feels like, because sometimes I feel that way too. So I thought maybe if we were sad and lonely together, we wouldn't have to feel that way alone." Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes. "You were right," he said softly. "You were absolutely right." He pulled her into a hug. This little girl who had saved him with nothing more than a question and a stuffed rabbit and an innocent faith in the goodness of strangers. "I love you, Daddy," Lily whispered into his shoulder. It was the first time she had called him that without prompting. "I love you too, sweetheart," Daniel replied, his voice thick, more than you'll ever know. The end. Thank you so much for watching this incredible journey of love, loss, healing, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, if it made you smile or cry or believe a little more in the power of human connection, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a like on this video, because every single like helps these stories reach more hearts that need them. Leave a comment telling us what part of this story touched you most. We read every single one, and we love hearing from you. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Share it with someone who's going through a hard time. Share it with someone who needs to know that even after the darkest nights, the sun can rise again. Remember, sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. A child's question, a stranger's kindness, the courage to stay when everything in you wants to run. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never forget, you never know whose life you might change just by being present, just by being kind, just by asking if you can sit with someone who looks like they need the company. God bless you all. We'll see you in the next story.